I want to start off by saying if you want an answer at the end, prepare to be disappointed. There just isn't one. I was an intern at Nickelodeon Studios for a year in 2005 for my degree in animation. It wasn't paid, of course, most internships aren't, but it did have some perks beyond education. To adults, it may not seem like a big one, but most kids at the time would shit themselves over it. Now, since I worked directly with the editors and animators, I got to view the new episodes days before they aired. I'll get right to it without too much unnecessary details. They'd very recently made the SpongeBob movie, and the entire staff was somewhat sapped of creativity, so it took them longer to start up the season, but the delay lasted longer for more upsetting reasons. There was a problem with the Series 4 premiere that set everyone and everything back for several months. Me and two other interns were in the editing room, along with the lead animator and some sound editors for the final cut. We received a copy that was supposed to be Fear of a Krabby Patty, and gathered around the screen to watch. Now, given that this isn't final yet, animators often put up a mock title card, sort of a inside joke for us, with phony, oftentimes lewd titles, such as How Sex Doesn't Work, instead of Rockabye Bivalve, when SpongeBob and Patrick adopt a sea scallop. Nothing particularly funny, but work-related chuckles. So when we saw the title card, Squidward's Suicide, we didn't think it more than a morbid joke. One of the interns did a small throat laugh at it. The happy-go-lucky music starts as normal. The story began with Squidward practicing his clarinet, hitting a few sour notes like normal. We hear SpongeBob laughing outside, and Squidward stops, yelling at him to keep it down as he has a concert that night and needs to practice. SpongeBob says okay, and goes to see Sandy with Patrick. The bubble splash screen comes up, and we see the ending of Squidward's concert. This is when things begin to seem off.
Ladies and gentlefish, Bikini Bottom's Community Rec Center is proud to present Squidward Tentacles.
While playing, a few frames repeat themselves, but the sound doesn't. At this point, sound is synced up with animation, so yeah, that's not really common. But when he stops playing, the sound finishes as if the skit never happened. There's a slight murmur in the crowd before they all begin to boo him. Not normal cartoon booing that's common in the show, but you could very clearly hear malice in it. Squidward's in full frame and looks visibly afraid. The shot goes to the crowd, with SpongeBob in center frame, and he too is booing, very much unlike him. This isn't the oddest thing, though. What's odd is everyone has hyper-realistic eyes, very detailed. Clearly not shots of real people's eyes, but something a bit more real than CGI. People's were red. Some of us looked at each other, obviously confused. But since we weren't the writers, we didn't question its appeal to children. Yet. The shot goes to Squidward sitting on the edge of his bed, looking very forlorn. The unsettling part is at this point, there is no sound. Literally, no sound. Not even feedback from the speakers in the room. It's as if the speakers were turned off, though their status shows them working perfectly. He just sat there, blinking, in the silence for about 30 seconds. Then he started to sob softly. He put his hands or tentacles over his eyes and cried quietly for a full minute, maybe more. All the while, a sound in the background very slowly growing from nothing to barely audible. It sounded like a slight breeze through the forest. The screen slowly began to zoom in on his face. By slow, I mean it's only noticeable if you look at a shot 10 seconds apart side by side. His sobbing gets louder, more full of hurt and anger. The wind through the trees sound gets slowly louder and more severe as if a storm is brewing somewhere. The eerie part is the sound, and Squidward's sobbing sounded real, as if it wasn't coming from the speakers, but as if the speakers were holes and the sound was just coming through the other side. As good a sound the studio likes to have, they don't purchase the equipment to be that good, to produce sound of that quality. Below the sound of the wind and sobbing, very faint, something sounded like laughing. After 30 seconds of this, the screen blurred and twitched violently, and something flashed over the screen, as if a single frame was replaced. The lead animation editor paused and rewound frame by frame. What we saw was horrible. It was a still photo of a dead child. He couldn't have been more than 6. The face was mangled and bloodied. One eye dangled over his upturned face, popped. He was naked down to his underwear and his stomach crudely cut open, his entrails laying beside him. He was laying on some pavement. It was probably a road. The most upsetting part was that there was a shadow of the photographer. There was no crime tape, no evidence markers or tags. The angle was completely off for a shot designed to be evidence. It would seem that the photographer was the person responsible for the child's death. We were, of course, mortified, but pressed on, hoping that it was just a sick joke. The screen flipped back to Squidward, still sobbing, louder than before, and half body in frame. There was now what appeared to be blood running down his face from his eyes. The blood was also done in hyper-realistic style, looking as if you touched it, you'd get blood on your fingers. The wind sounded now as if there was a gale blowing through the forest. There was even snapping sounds of branches. The laughing, a deep baritone, lasting at longer intervals and coming more frequently. After about 20 seconds, the screen again twisted and showed a single-frame photo. This time, the photo was that of what appeared to be a little girl, no older than the first child. She was laying on her stomach, her barrettes in a pool of blood next to her. Her left eye was too popped, naked except for her underpants. Her entrails were piled on top of her, above another crude cut along her back. Again, the body was on the street, and the photographer's shadow was visible. Very similar in size and shape to the first. I had to choke back vomit. One intern, the only female in the room, ran out. The show resumed. About 5 seconds after the second photo played, Squidward went silent, as did all sound, like it was when the scene started. He put his tentacles down, and his eyes were now done in hyper-realism like the others were in the beginning of the episode. They were bleeding, bloodshot, and pulsating. He just stared at the screen, as if watching the viewer. This time, the photo was of a boy, about the same age, but this time the screen was different. The entrails were just being pulled out from the stomach by a large hand, and the right eye popped and dangled, blood trickling down it. The animator proceeded. It was hard to believe, but the next one was different, but we couldn't tell what. He went on to the next, same thing. He went back to the first and played them quicker, and I lost it. I vomited on the floor. The animating and sound editors gasped at the screen. The 5 frames were not as if they were 5 different photos. They were played out as if they were frames from a video. We saw the hand slowly lift out the guts. We saw the kid's eye focus on it. We even saw 2 frames of the kid beginning to blink. The lead sound editor told us to stop. He had to call in the creator to see this. Mr. Hillenberg arrived within about 15 minutes. He was confused as to why we had called him down there, so the editor just continued the episode. Squidward had just stared at the viewer. The shot quickly panned out, and a deep voice said,
"Do it. Do it."
And we saw in Squidward's hand a shotgun. He immediately puts the gun in his mouth and pulls the trigger. Realistic blood and brain matter splatters against the wall behind him, and he flies back with the force. The last 5 seconds of the episode show his body on the bed, on the side, one eye dangling on what's left of his head above the floor. Then the episode ends. The only theory we could think of was the file was edited by someone in the chain from the drawing studio to here. The CTO was called to analyze what had happened. There was an investigation due to the nature of the photos, but nothing came of it. No child scene was identified. No clues were gathered from the data involved, nor physical clue from the photos. I never believed in unexplainable phenomena before. But now that I have something happen, and can't prove anything about it beyond anecdotal evidence, I think twice about things.